LG's C series and G series are some of the two most popular WOLED lines in the world, and 2025 is a good year for the two heavy hitters. The LG C5 is the mainstream sweet spot, now far brighter than last year's C4. The LG G5 is the showcase model with its RGB Tandem panel and 4K at 165Hz. Both sets also received a June 2025 firmware update that fixed their HDR10 contouring problem in Filmmaker Mode, although not in Game Optimizer mode. But compared to one another, which one should you get? On paper, this sounds like the easiest recommendation ever. G5 if you want the best, C5 if you want the value. In practice, there are some landmines in game mode and some meaningful differences in tone mapping, accuracy, and reflections that will nudge your choice one way or the other. Hey, I'm Alex from Ratings.com, and I'm about to break it all down for your viewing pleasure. Both TVs use LG's WOLED stack and deliver perfect pixel-level blacks with zero blooming, essentially infinite native contrast, and excellent uniformity. Both support Dolby Vision, HDR10, HLG, and 4 full bandwidth HDMI 2.1 ports. Both run WebOS with the same app catalog, the same Game Optimizer dashboard, and the same ALLM/VRR support. You also get near instantaneous pixel response for razor-sharp motion and class-leading input lag at 120Hz and 144Hz class refresh rates, although the G5 goes up to 165Hz. Otherwise, from a features checklist, these two are more alike than different. Now, if you like bright TVs, the G5 starts to earn its keep. In Filmmaker Mode, the G5 is the brighter OLED in small highlight windows, and it sustains higher luminance in mid-size highlights before the ABL steps in. In real content, that translates to crisper glints on chrome, hotter flames and sparks, more sun-on-water scintillation in outdoor scenes. You get the gist. The C5 is no slouch though. It is much brighter than the C4 and bright enough to make HDR visibly pop. Side by side though, the G5 pops more often and holds that pop longer. Although only in content that can really push the G5, which isn't most content, so keep that in mind. If most of what you watch is mastered at 4000 nits, then the G5 will look brighter. But you won't notice much of a difference in content mastered at 1000 and 600 nits, except in entirely bright scenes where the G5 stays noticeably brighter than the C5. Here, in game mode, the split is clear. The C5 loses a meaningful chunk of its HDR brightness in Game Optimizer. You still get a great HDR gaming image, but it doesn't look as vibrant as the same scene in Filmmaker Mode. The G5, by contrast, keeps far more of its HDR punch in Game Optimizer, so its games look closer to Filmmaker without workarounds. If you care about the absolute brightest HDR gaming image, the G5 wins. Both TVs shipped with an HDR10 contouring issue that showed up as banding in darker gradients, especially in Game Optimizer. The June 2025 firmware update largely fixed this in Filmmaker Mode on both sets, and it also brought a nicer gradient handling overall and cleaner PQ EOTF tracking. Game Optimizer is still a problem though, as the banding in HDR10 is still apparent in that mode. On the G5, you can set the TV to Filmmaker Mode, enable ALLM on the TV and on your console or PC, and the measured input lag remains essentially the same as if you were in Game Optimizer. That workaround gives you the best of both worlds, the fixed gradients from Filmmaker and the low latency you want for games. On the C5, that same trick doesn't pan out. Filmmaker plus ALLM still carries higher lag than Game Optimizer, although it's still playable for most people. If you change the input label to PC, input lag goes down, but then another quirk appears in SDR. The peak brightness control is disabled in SDR when the input is set to PC. In short, the G5's workaround is clean. The C5 is a series of trade-offs. If you're sensitive to banning in HDR10 titles and you want zero lag gaming, the G5's behavior is simply friendlier here. When it comes to PQ EOTF tracking, both TVs are basically just as good. You're not losing anything by going with one over the other. Nice. As for the rest of the image processing suite, the G5 ships with LG's top processing package, the Alpha 11 AI processor Gen 2, and the C5 uses the Alpha 9 AI processor Gen 8. Seems like the G5 should have the edge here, but in real use, it's really hard to tell the two TVs apart. Both are excellent at smoothing macro blocking in low bitrate streams, while preserving fine detail better than many rivals, and both upscale well from 720p and 1080p, although the G5 does upscale content a bit better than the C5. Gradients are where the June update made the largest difference to the C5, taking it from noticeable banding in HDR10 at times to you have to look for it, at least in Filmmaker mode. Game Optimizer mode is another story, as we previously said. The G5 was already solid here and remains a little smoother in tricky shades after calibration. If you are extremely sensitive to banding, the G5 is the safer pick, especially if you're a gamer, but the gap narrowed enough that most viewers will be satisfied with either after the update. There is one last nuance that matters if you sit close or plan to use either TV as a large PC monitor. Both the C5 and G5 show diagonal lines that are a byproduct of panel dithering. At a normal sofa distance, you're unlikely to notice them, but up close in some games or test patterns, the lines can be apparent. If your setup involves a desk or you are very sensitive to near-screen artifacts, be aware of it before buying either TV. SDR is where 2025 really moved the goalposts for OLED, as previously only high-end models were bright in SDR. Not this year. The C5 is extremely bright in SDR for a mid-tier OLED, with real scene values that make daytime sports and talk shows look properly punchy without being dim or washed out. The G5 is still brighter, which matters if you have a wall of windows, or you just like your cable and YouTube content to sit higher on the luminance ladder. In average bright rooms, the C5 is enough. In tougher rooms, the G5's extra headroom shows. Both sets use LG's glossy anti-reflective finish, so direct reflections show up as mirror-like highlights. However, the G5 seriously reduces the intensity of those reflections. They get real dim, almost faded out. On the C5, not so much. It's the classic mirror look you know and hate. Considering that the G5 is already brighter in SDR, it really gives it the edge in rooms with tons of light placed directly opposite its panel. In ambient lighting contexts, the G5 again has the edge, although by less than you'd think. Still, look at those two shots. Yeah, it's easy to see which is which here. Ultimately, the G5 is a lot less annoying to watch in very bright rooms, but remember, we're comparing an expensive top-of-the-line model to a mid-range model. The C5, taken in isolation, is solid, and it's very bright in SDR. At least both keep black levels impressively stable under ambient light, compared with QD OLEDs, which means you do not see blacks turning gray just because a lamp is on. HDR color volume favors the G5 because brightness favors the G5. Bright yellows stay richer, reds stay burning red as they approach the set's ceiling, and saturated midtones hold their saturation longer before tone mapping desaturates them to preserve detail. Again, the C5 looks excellent in isolation. The moment you put them side by side in ambitious HDR material though, the G5's extra headroom pulls some colors forward. Pre-calibration HDR accuracy was a strength of the C5 even before the update, and the firmware cleaned up gradient errors and mapping issues further, giving it the edge overall. The G5 is also accurate in HDR out of the box, but it runs a bit too cool and has more white balance issues than the C5. With calibration, both really nail reference. Ultimately, without calibration, the C5 has a small advantage in open the box and watch HDR accuracy, while the G5 has the visible advantage in HDR color volume. Decide which you value more. In SDR, both cover all of Rec. 709, and both can be quickly dialed into reference with a quick pass through the warm color temperature and the recommended picture modes. Easy breezy. If you're not the calibrating type, the G5 here has the edge. It's again a tad too cool, but otherwise its colors are on target. Its white balance is nearly perfect, and it's just solid all around. The C5, inversely, is a bit too warm, its white balance is a bit off, but still super good, and who are we kidding? It's still great, just not as stellar as the G5. Frankly, both of these TVs are real solid when it comes to accuracy, whether it's HDR colors, HDR brightness, or SDR colors. All 4 HDMI ports are 2.1 on both TVs. The C5 supports 4K at 144Hz, the G5 goes to 4K at 165Hz. Input lag is extremely low for both in Game Optimizer at 120 and 144Hz cost refresh rates. Initially, the G5's input lag was suspiciously high at 165Hz, but since that June firmware update, it's now exactly where we expect it to be. Blazing fast. Neither TV's built-in audio will replace a decent soundbar. Both pass Dolby Atmos via eARC, and LG no longer passes DTS on 2025 sets, which makes us sad. The G5's gallery-style design, flush wall mount options, and premium trim will matter to some buyers. Overall, there's not much else to dwell on here. This is what ultimately separates the two for most shoppers. The G5 costs more, and it earns that premium with higher brightness in both HDR and SDR, better HDR gaming punch, slightly stronger gradient handling, and that clean Filmmaker plus ALM path that makes the HDR10 fix usable for gamers. The G5 also comes with full 4K at 165Hz support for you PC gamers. You're welcome. The C5 undercuts the price while still bringing a very bright SDR image for daytime TV, excellent HDR and movie modes after the update, and 4K at 144Hz support across all 4 HDMI 2.1 ports. Bottom line, with the G5, you are paying extra for more light, extra color headroom, and easier gaming workarounds. If it wasn't for the lingering HDR10 bug, the choice would be as obvious as you'd expect. How much are you willing to spend? But as it is, pick the LG G5 if you crave the brightest HDR highlights you can get from WOLED, or you game a lot in HDR and want that vibrancy without fiddling, and you want the most robust color volume LG offers. Its RGB Tandem panel is the real deal for high impact scenes, and its Filmmaker plus ALM behavior lets you have your cake and eat it too. Pick the LG C5 if you want a killer all-rounder at a lower price. It's bright enough in SDR to look very solid in a sunny living room. It looks wonderfully accurate in Filmmaker mode after the firmware update. Its gradients are now very clean, and its 4K at 144Hz support covers modern GPUs. Just go in knowing that Game Optimizer is dimmer than Filmmaker, and the Filmmaker plus ALM trick does not map cleanly to low lag without the PC input label workaround, which brings its own compromises in SDR. Either way, you are getting one of the best OLEDs of 2025. And that wraps up our comparison of the LG C5 and G5. Which one fits your needs better? Are you annoyed that the HDR10 bug persists in Game Optimizer mode, or you couldn't care less? Do you think your content can take advantage of the G5's higher performance ceilings? Let us know in the comments. Until next time, I'm Alex from Ratings.com, where we help you find the best products for your needs. Bye. Both TVs used both LGs, I was gonna say, but 2025 sets, which makes us sad. I don't know if I want to take that again. Boo.